Hi everybody, welcome to our training today on enrolling members in eGrants. My name is David Weatherly. I'm one of the AmeriCorps portfolio managers here at YouthBuild USA, and I'll be walking through the training with you today. So in terms of what we're going to cover, we're going to focus on the enrollment process from start to finish with a particular emphasis on eGrants. So I'm going to mention a few things that are necessary for the enrollment process, but I'm not going to go into great depth, for example, with criminal history checks. But we will talk about how the individual applies, screening the applicant, selecting them in eGrants, having the applicant complete their enrollment form, getting through the Social Security Administration and citizenship checks, that final verification in eGrants, and then finally completing the process and getting that individual enrolled, either as an individual or as a group. So there are some requirements for all member enrollments that you should be aware of. The first is that their citizenship and Social Security number need to have been verified by the eGrants system. They also need to have their criminal history check process completed for applicants over the age of 18. So please note this is at the time of enrollment in terms of their age, so they may apply, for example, as a 17-year-old, have a birthday, turn 18 prior to their official enrollment, and in that case, that individual would need a criminal history check because it's the start date that matters in terms of the age of the individual. You also need to make sure that you've completed the eligibility verification form to ensure that you're documenting that these individuals are eligible to serve, and the individuals need to have completed their portion of the enrollment form, which happens in My AmeriCorps. So we're going to go through each of these steps and how they happen in the system. One thing I really want to make sure is clear is that an individual is not an AmeriCorps member until they're officially enrolled in eGrants with that start date. So prior to that start date and until they're in eGrants, they cannot earn any AmeriCorps hours. So we want to make sure we get this process completed as quickly as possible to get those individuals into the system so that they can start earning hours towards their AmeriCorps Education Award. But if they're not in eGrants, it doesn't matter if they're in DYB or another system. If they're not in eGrants, they are not an AmeriCorps member. So this first step in the process, you have your individual applying to the program, and this can happen in a number of different ways. It's unique to your local program. Then we go through the screening process with the individual where you gather information, complete the criminal history checks, and determine the eligibility of the individual. In terms of screening, just some things that be aware of, that they need to be screened for eligibility and criminal history, and you can add additional requirements to the process. So we're going to go over the basic requirements, but you as a program may say that there are additional requirements to join your program, but that is something that you need to make sure that you have in writing and that the applicant is aware of, because under AmeriCorps they do have the opportunity to challenge disqualifying criteria, especially around criminal history checks. So just be aware that you want to have any additional requirements that you're going to have in writing. We have the basic requirements in our member service agreement template that you can find on our website, but anything additional the program would need to add to that document or another document provided to applicants. You should also build in as much time as you can to complete the criminal history checks and determine eligibility. This process can take a while between getting all the criminal history checks done and getting all the documents you need, so just make sure you build in as much time as possible. And then just as a note, they need to have their criminal history checks completed before their start date, and the citizenship and Social Security needs to be verified on or before their start date. To make things simple, we want everything ideally done the day before their start date, so just kind of keep that in mind. The day before their start date, you want to have everything completed. So we're going to want to gather some information about our applicants. This typically happens in the application, but just make sure you have these things, their legal name, their Social Security number, their date of birth, because you're going to need those to put that information into eGrants in order to invite the members and move the process forward. It's also recommended that you are gathering their citizenship documentation, which you're going to need to get those individuals enrolled, as well as contact information to be. On the criminal history check side of things, I'm not going to go too in-depth here. We have other training materials around criminal history checks, but just so you are aware that this is a required part and you're going to need to enter into eGrants the date that all of these are completed. So just so you know that there are 3 parts to this criminal history check: the National Sex Offender Public Website check, the State Criminal History Record check, and then the FBI fingerprint check. So all those need to be done at least the day before the individual is enrolled in eGrants. If you do have somebody who's enrolling for a second term of AmeriCorps and their break-in service is no greater than 180 days, they can use their previous check and that would still be valid. In terms of eligibility, you need to do a screening as part of your recruitment and selection process. For individuals who are doing a second term of service, you still need to determine eligibility and certify that applicant. So even though somebody may have done America before, you still need to make sure you fill this out. We document this through the eligibility verification form. And what the major requirements are: age. So the individual for our program must be at least 16 years of age. They need to have a high school diploma equivalent or agree to work towards a high school diploma equivalent during their term of service. So this is an AmeriCorps rule. Most of our young people are going to be coming in without a high school diploma or equivalent. That's okay. They just need to agree to work towards one. And that's included in the member service agreement. Again, that template is on our website. So when they sign the member service agreement, part of their signing it is agreeing to work towards a high school diploma or equivalent if they don't already have one. They need to be a citizen, national, or lawful permanent resident alien of the United States. So if you do have questions about this, because I know some programs do work with refugees and other populations that may or may not have the appropriate documentation, please reach out to your portfolio manager and we can kind of walk you through. For most citizens, a birth certificate is going to be the most common form of documentation here. They also need to satisfy the National Criminal History Check eligibility criteria, which really comes down to sex offense and murder, but again, we're not going to get into all those details in this training today. And we want to make sure that we get all of this eligibility documentation information up front and as quickly as possible, because if not, we could delay the process, and if it's done incorrectly, it could result in cost disallowance under monitoring. So in terms of selecting the member as an applicant in eGrants, that's going to be our next step in this process. So we're going to invite the individuals. They're going to complete their enrollment form in My AmeriCorps, and then that's going to trigger an automatic Social Security eGrants administration check. So let's walk through each of those steps. So the first part is getting your individuals started in the system. There are now 2 different ways to do this. It's either selecting them because they applied via My AmeriCorps or inviting the individual as part of a specific recruitment. For almost all of our young people, we're going to be using the inviting an individual path. So that's the one I'm going to be going over today. If you need assistance for somebody for the My AmeriCorps application process, please reach out to us and we can walk you through that. But this training is going to be focused on inviting that individual. So when you go into eGrants, you're going to see on this portal home tab a space to invite members. You're going to click on that. You'll see this form come up. This is where, when we're talking about gathering some of that information ahead of time that you need to gather, so make sure you have the name, social security number, date of birth, and importantly an email address. So not all of our young people are going to have an email address, so that's something to think about ahead of time, where you might want to help the young person create an email address in order to move this process forward. And you also need to make sure that all of the information in terms of the name, social security numbers, birth date, match the documentation that you've collected to verify the individual. So in this case, we're going to enter in all the information, and then we're either going to hit save or we're going to hit add another, and then there's going to be an option to send it to the individual. So what happens after we do this process is that individual is going to get an email from My AmeriCorps at americorps.gov. Here's some of the sample language from another AmeriCorps program, and they will click the link in that email, and this link takes them to another page where they need to put in information. So again, that individual needs to have on hand the information about their name, date of birth, social security number, and the email that it was sent to. So make sure they have access to that so they can complete the rest of the process. Then they're going to need to complete a member enrollment form. So this is a requirement for AmeriCorps. So previously it was possible for staff members to fill out this information, but now it has to be completed by the individual. So this is something that you might need to take some time and sit down with your young people and help them walk through the process. So make sure that they have everything that they need for this in order to move forward. Here's what the enrollment form looks like. So here are some of the questions that they're going to get: information about their address, different information about their citizenship status, their education status, their voter status, things like that. So keep all this information in mind when you're getting your young people ready for this process, because you may need to sit down with them and help walk through this form to help them fill it out correctly. In terms of citizenship and social security verification, this automatically happens within the eGrant system, but it does not happen until your potential member completes that enrollment form in My AmeriCorps. So when they complete that enrollment form, it triggers this process. So the earlier they complete that enrollment form, the earlier this process triggers, which is important, because if you have an issue with their social security or citizenship status, it could take some time to get resolved. So typically within 3 business days, you're going to get back either a verified or returned result. So those are the main statuses you're going to get. So here's an example here at the bottom of an individual who is verified for the social security and verified for their citizenship. Here's also an example of an individual who got their social security number verified, but their citizenship status says returned. So let's talk through a little bit what happens when you get that return status and other steps you need to take. So if you get that return status, you're going to need to go through a manual verification. So what does this mean? This means that you're going to need to submit some additional documentation to AmeriCorps so that they can review that and manually verify that this individual is eligible. So that's a large reason why we want to make sure we collect that documentation up front. So if this process is triggered, we have that documentation in hand, we can move forward to submitting it. So the way this works is you're notified through the eGrant system when you go in and you see that social security status for the individual or citizenship status that you need to move forward because it got marked as returned. You'll request a secure link from the AmeriCorps hotline. You'll submit your additional documentation. The hotline will review everything after they send it to the National Service Trust. If everything is good, then the eGrants record will be updated and it'll change to manually verified. If it's not good, then they'll have to reach out and request additional information. So again, note that when you have one of these return verifications, it could take a few days, up to a couple of weeks to complete this process fully. So factor that into your decision-making process. Try and get your young people to do their portion of the enrollment form as quickly as possible to trigger this check so that you can get ahead of things. In terms of requesting a secure file link, it's fairly straightforward. There is a web form that you use, and this is the place that you do any sort of eGrants or My AmeriCorps questions or issues that you have. You request that ticket through the help desk. There's a link there. And then you want to note that you are specifically asking for a secure file link. That helps them move the process forward and make sure that you're able to get everything into the individual who needs to review it. All right, so we've gone through those steps of identifying the individual, selecting them. Now we need to do a little bit of verification of eligibility and completing the process. So we're going to confirm that the social security number and citizenship verification are correct. This will show up when you look at that individual's records in eGrants. and you want to make sure you either have the verified or the manually verified status. There are a number of different statuses that you could have. There's open, pending, verified, returned, manually verified, and can't be verified. So just so you're aware, if you're submitting documentation and that documentation ultimately demonstrates that the individual is not eligible, then you may end up getting that can't be verified status. But really, what you want to do to make sure that you're able to move forward is make sure they have that verified or manually verified status. Another important piece of enrolling an individual is the 8-day requirement in terms of getting that individual into eGrants in a timely manner based on their start date. So how this works is it's the date of enrollment action, which is really when you click that final button, and we'll kind of get to the final button in a bit, of enrolling that individual in eGrants. So when do you actually complete their enrollment minus the member's start date should be less than or equal to 8 days. So what this means is, and here's a calendar example here, say I've got my individual, I want to start them as a start date of Monday, January 4th, and that's when they're going to start earning AmeriCorps hours. Well, I've got from Monday, January 4th, all the way until Tuesday, January 12th, in order to complete this process in eGrants. So anytime you're kind of wondering, how much time do I have to get this done? Well, you want to make sure you're trying to get it done within 8 days. Now, say for example, well, you can't get it done within 8 days. The system will allow you to go back and do prior enrollments, but it does show up on your grant record as being over the 8 days. You would be required to fill out a memo explaining why it took more than 8 days to get this individual into the system and into eGrants. So it is something that we want to avoid if we can, but just be aware that there is some flexibility within the system now. In terms of completing the individual's member enrollment form, so this is after they have completed their enrollment form, it's gone through the Citizenship Social Security verification. Now you're going back into eGrants and you're clicking on their record and you're moving this piece forward. Important things that you're going to do are establishing the criminal history check certification date. So you need to be aware of when all their criminal history checks are completed and adjudicated. There's no more initiation, there's no more accompaniment. All the checks need to be done and adjudicated before you can enter in that date. So you're going to put that date in, and that member can't be enrolled until at least the day after that date that you put into this box here. And then you're also going to go through, establish their start date, make sure you're getting the right program year that you want to enroll them in, make sure you're enrolling them in the correct program, although all of you should only have access to your own program, and then make sure they have the correct slot type. Then you're going to check the box to certify that all of this information is accurate and correct. And then finally, you're going to click the Enroll Member button. And once you do that, the member is officially enrolled in eGrants. So it's really important that you make sure everything is correct before you do that, because it is very difficult to fix any issues after you officially enroll that member. So before you click that final button, do a double check of everything. Make sure you have the criminal history check information on file. Make sure you've got all their citizenship and Social Security documentation on file, and then go ahead and click that button. In terms of saving information, you can enter in information ahead of time and save it. So if you want to get things ready to go, you can complete some of this and then save it and come back to it within the state and national work basket. Well, let's spend some time talking through how do you do group enrollment. There were some group enrollment options in the past with eGrants, but they were a little bit finicky. They've updated the system, so in theory it should be a little bit easier. So if you're enrolling a lot of members at the same time, this is something that might appeal to you, as it can potentially be a quicker part of the process. So in terms of this group enrollment screen, here's what it looks like. Some information you're going to need for this is you're going to be able to do 20 members at a time and enroll them simultaneously. As you see here, we're going to be looking at knowing all of their criminal history check certification dates, knowing all of their start dates, and then knowing all their service locations, which should just be your local program. So just note some differences between the group enrollment and the individual enrollment. Obviously, with the group enrollment, you can do individuals up to 20. Individual enrollment is only 1. Their program year and program title are going to come already from the member invitation, whereas for the individual, you're going to have to select them. You can't use it for individuals who applied through MyAmericorps, but that's okay because most of our enrollments do happen through the invitation process. And you can't use it if you have different individuals who are invited under different program years and program titles. So they have to all be the same. But again, that's going to be the case almost all the time with our program, so it shouldn't be a barrier. They're not going to show up on the group enrollment tab until they've been verified. So you do kind of want to wait to do this group enrollment until you've gone through that certification process and make sure everybody's done. But it's also a neat trick to just check to see who's been cleared, because if you go to that group enrollment tab and you don't see them, then you know that individual has not cleared their citizenship and social security status. And then, as always, the criminal history check certification needs to happen the day before that individual is completed for individuals over the age of 18 at the time of enrollment. In terms of steps of the process, there is going to be this tab within the state and national work basket for group enrollments. You're going to click on that. You're going to enter in the information about your program and your slot type. This should be relatively straightforward because you're only operating with one program. You're going to want to make sure you get the slot types correct. For most of you, that's going to be quarter time members. And then you're going to want to fill in all of the criminal history check information for each individual. And this needs to be, as I've said a few times, at least the day before that individual's start date. So you're going to select their service location. Again, most of you are only going to have one, so it should be fairly straightforward. And then finally, you're going to select the start date. So keep in mind this start date needs to be at least a day after that criminal history check certification happens. So we can already see on this page we're probably going to have a problem with Kindle because their certification is after their start date. And then also please note the 8-day rule around this in terms of their start date should be within 8 days of when you are doing this enrollment in eGrants. So once you have all the information correct, you're just going to click Select to Enroll. Go ahead and hit the certification at the bottom and then Enrollment. And assuming everything is correct, you'll have all of your individuals go through and they'll be officially AmeriCorps members. So again, pause before you hit that final enrollment button. Make sure you've got everything correct and then go ahead and move forward. You can do up to 20 individuals with this. You can also save the information, so if not everybody has completed their citizenship and social security verifications, for example, and you want to wait a little bit to get those through, you can save this and come back to it. Once we certify everything and try and get everything enrolled, we may notice that some individuals are going to flag as having an issue. In this case, we have Catherine, who had an issue with her criminal history check date, and so it is not going to enroll that individual. However, the other enrollments should have gone through. Some things to be aware of that you want to make sure are done so that you don't get any errors. You got to make sure you've got sufficient slots available. If you need additional slots, please reach out to your portfolio manager. You got to make sure their citizenship and social security are verified on or before their start date. Their criminal history checks are verified at least the day before their start date. You got their service location selected correctly. The start date is no later than today's date. and the applicant is eligible to serve, so they don't have any issues with serving more than 4 service terms. There's no issues around partial education awards. There's no issues about outstanding unsatisfactory performance from a previous term of service, and not currently enrolled in a same program or another program that would exceed full-time service. If the enrollment button isn't active, so it's showing up as grayed out and you're not able to click it, here are some reasons why that might be. Their Social Security and Citizenship verification status may not be done. You may need to make sure that CHC verification is correct. You got to make sure the start date is entered correctly, and you got to make sure that all the fields are completed. So if you go through all these steps, you go through your checklist, and you're like, wait, I think I'm doing everything right, and you're still running into an issue, you can contact the eGrants help desk from that form that we were discussing earlier, or also reach out to us and we can help you through the process. So that's it for today. Thank you for going through this with me in terms of the enrollment process. Hopefully that answered questions that you have. But we're always happy to work with you to make sure that you know how to do these things correctly. If you have any additional questions, if you have anything else you need help with, please reach out to your portfolio manager and we're happy to help you. I hope you all are having a wonderful day and I hope to see you soon. With that, I'll close things out and I'll talk to you all later. Bye, everybody.